The deadbolt clicked while I was still on the porch. Not a soft click, a hard one. Final, metallic. My father's hand was still on the inside lock when my suitcase hit the wet grass beside me and fell open. Shirts, a cracked deodorant stick, my senior year yearbook, a pair of work boots I'd paid for myself, all of it half spilling onto the lawn while my mother stood behind the screen door and said, "If you won't tell the police you were driving, then you don't live here." I was 18 years old. It was 11:43 p.m. There were porch lights on up and down the street. Mrs. Kim from across the road had actually opened her curtain. The patrol car that had just left was still at the corner, brake lights glowing red through the drizzle. And inside my parents' house, my house for exactly 12 more seconds, my younger brother Trevor was sitting at the kitchen table with an ice pack on his jaw, the golden child they were trying to protect, while they threw me onto the lawn like I was the problem. Then my father opened the inner door just wide enough to toss my house key at my feet. "Figure it out," he said. What they didn't know was that I walked off that lawn with 12 screenshots, 1 voicemail, and the only proof that night had never happened the way they were about to tell it. What they also didn't know was that being locked out of that house was the first useful thing my father ever did for me. And what absolutely nobody on that street knew was that 7 years later, those same 2 people would be standing on my front porch with matching roller suitcases, asking me for my spare key, like the last 7 years had been a clerical error. I can still see the lawn, patchy, too much clover, one muddy strip near the mailbox where my father never fixed the drainage, rain beating on the suitcase fabric, my extra belt hanging out of the side pocket like something desperate, my mother keeping one hand on the doorframe so she wouldn't have to touch me. Trevor wouldn't even look up. That made it worse. If he'd looked smug, I could have hated him cleanly. But he looked scared, small, ash pale under the kitchen light. He had blood on the cuff of his sweatshirt and a split lip, and he still let them do it. My father pointed at me through the mesh. "Last chance." He always used that voice when he wanted obedience to sound reasonable. I was still holding the paper my mother had shoved at me 2 minutes earlier. 3 sentences. That was all. A neat little lie for the responding officer when they came back in the morning. I took Dad's truck without permission. I clipped the landscaping van trying to park. Trevor came outside after he heard the noise. That was the script. Never mind, Trevor had been drinking for 4 hours at Jake Bell's graduation party. Never mind, I'd been at the diner on Route 8, covering a late shift until 10:55. Never mind, the front of my father's truck was folded in around one headlight, and the passenger mirror was hanging by a wire because Trevor had driven it into a parked van and then into a retaining wall, trying to overcorrect. All they needed was one thing: my name on the lie. When I tore the paper in half, my mother flinched like I'd struck her. That's when my father grabbed my suitcase from the hall closet, walked it outside, and dumped it into the rain. He didn't yell. That was the part people never understand. Public cruelty is loud. Family cruelty is efficient. If they had just screamed at me, maybe I would have remembered it as anger. but they were calm, organized, prepared, which meant this had been discussed before I ever got home. And that meant one thing. I wasn't their backup plan. I was their plan. In my family, I had been the difficult one for so long that people repeated it without needing examples. Trevor was charm in a varsity jacket. Trevor was such a leader. Trevor was just high energy. Trevor could break curfew, break furniture, break other people's patience, and somehow it all came back as proof he had spirit. If he forgot an assignment, he was overwhelmed. If he mouthed off, he was passionate. If he got caught with vodka in the trunk at 16, my father called it boys pushing limits. I got a very different script. I was the one who asked questions at the wrong time, the one who noticed missing money, the one who didn't laugh when my father made jokes that only worked if somebody weaker absorbed them. I worked after school. I kept receipts. I stayed quiet in rooms where quiet was safer. So naturally, in a family built around whoever generated the most noise, I became cold, ungrateful, always keeping score. By the time I was 17, relatives said things like, "Eli's smart, but he doesn't really have Trevor's spark." Spark. That was the family word for damage when Trevor did it. If I had done even half of what he did, I would have been called unstable. So when my parents locked me out, nobody who'd heard their version of me would have been shocked. The black sheep finally ran off. The moody son couldn't follow house rules. The one with attitude stormed out. That's the story they started telling before the rain on my suitcase had even dried. Here's what actually happened. At 10:58 p.m., I pulled into the diner parking lot after my shift and saw 3 missed calls from my mother. At 11:06, I walked through the front door and smelled hot coolant and whiskey. At 11:08, I saw my father standing in the kitchen with Trevor's car keys in one hand and a dish towel full of ice in the other. At 11:09, my mother said, "Your brother made a mistake, and we need you to help us fix it." Not can you, need. Trevor had taken Dad's truck because his own car was blocked in. He'd left Jake Bell's party drunk, sideswiped a landscaping van parked near the Bell house, jumped the curb, and scraped the retaining wall hard enough to tear up the passenger side. One of the bellboys had come running. Trevor had swung at him. That explained the split lip. An officer had already been there once because a neighbor heard the crash. Trevor told them he'd come home on foot after hearing a commotion. Now the officer wanted written statements in the morning. My father wanted me to say I'd borrowed the truck after work and panicked. "Your brother has scholarships," my mother said. "A future. One bad report could destroy everything." I remember staring at her because she said future like I didn't have one. I remember asking the obvious question, "What about mine?" My father answered that immediately. "Don't be dramatic." That was the hierarchy right there. Trevor's future was a cathedral. Mine was a prop they could move when they needed room. When I said no, my mother sent me 3 texts while standing 4 feet away, as if written pressure might work better than spoken pressure. "Please don't do this. Families protect each other. If you love us, sign it. I kept every one of them. Then, my father left me a voicemail at 11:31 when I walked out to cool off in the driveway and didn't answer his first call. I still know the exact line because I listened to it so many times it burned into me. If you make us choose tonight, don't expect to like the answer. 12 minutes later, I was on the lawn. They thought I was powerless because I had one suitcase, $183 in my checking account, and nowhere to sleep. They had no idea what they'd triggered. Because the second you stop begging people to love you fairly, you start seeing them clearly. I spent my first night out on that lawn in the 24-hour laundromat behind the gas station on Fremont. Not because I wanted to, because every person I texted was either out of town, asleep, or still too afraid of my father to get involved. At 1:17 a.m., Mrs. Kim pulled into the lot in her silver Corolla, got out without an umbrella, and handed me a plastic grocery bag with 2 things inside: a turkey sandwich wrapped in foil and a flash drive. "I thought you might need both," she said. I looked at the drive. "What is this?" She glanced back toward the road. "My porch camera faces your house." Then she got back in her car and left. I sat there under fluorescent light with my wet suitcase between my knees and realized my parents weren't the only people who had been watching our house for years. Some people just hadn't been speaking. That flash drive held exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds of footage. My father opening the front door, my suitcase hitting the grass, my mother's voice through the screen. "If you won't tell the police you were driving, then you don't live here." Me, standing there in the rain, with that torn paper still in my hand. Proof. Not enough to fix my life that night, but enough to protect the truth from theirs. By 8:15 the next morning, they were already moving. My Aunt Denise texted, "Your mother said you ran off after another argument." At 8:22, my cousin Mark sent, "Bro, you okay? Heard you lost it at home." At 8:40, the youth pastor from my parents' church called and left a voicemail about honoring your father even in emotional moments. They were fast. They had done this before. Not exactly like this, but enough to know the rhythm. Get the story out first, make the unstable kid sound unstable before he speaks. Seed words like disrespectful, volatile, confused. If enough people hear the same version before breakfast, truth spends the whole day catching up barefoot. So I stopped trying to explain myself, one person at a time. I sent 4 things to exactly 3 people. The screenshots from my mother, the voicemail from my father, a photo of the lie they wanted me to sign, ripped in half on the lawn, and a clip from Mrs. Kim's porch camera. Not to the whole family, just to Aunt Denise because she gossiped faster than broadband. To my cousin Mark because he knew Trevor's drinking wasn't new. And to Coach Walker because Trevor's scholarship future suddenly mattered to my parents more than morality, and I wanted at least one adult outside the family who'd seen the real shape of the night. I didn't add commentary. I just wrote, "This is why I left." Then I turned my phone face down. The silence after that felt different, not peaceful, loaded. My parents could survive being cruel. What they couldn't stand was losing control of the story. And by noon, my mother called for a reason that told me exactly where her panic had landed. She didn't call to apologize. She called to ask whether I had shown anyone anything. That was her first question. Not "where are you?" Not "did you sleep somewhere safe?" Not "are you okay?" "Eli," she said, voice tight and low, "you need to think carefully before you spread a private family matter." I was sitting outside the diner with a coffee I couldn't taste. "You mean the part where you tried to make me confess to Trevor's crash?" "I mean the part where families don't destroy each other over one bad night." I almost laughed. One bad night. As if the lockout had appeared from nowhere. As if it wasn't built on years of Trevor being the exception and me being the sponge. Then she said the part I'll never forget. "You know your father can't be embarrassed like this." Can't. Not shouldn't. Can't. That was when I understood my role in that house with perfect clarity. I wasn't a sun in moments that mattered. I was an absorbent surface, something expensive feelings could be spilled onto. I asked her where my college envelope was. Silence. My grandmother had sent me cards every birthday, with checks, she said, were for getting free. My mother deposited them into a joint savings account she promised she was keeping safe for tuition and first rent. I'd never seen the full balance. Now I knew why. "Mom," I said, "where is it?" Another silence. Then, "We used some of it for family expenses." Family expenses. Trevor's lawyer. Trevor's messes. Trevor's future again. There are betrayals that hurt because they're new, and then there are betrayals that hurt because they confirm what you already knew and were still stupid enough to hope wasn't true. 3 days later, my Aunt Denise, bless her inability to mind her business, forwarded me an email chain by accident while trying to send it to my mother. That was how I found out some of it meant $11,800. My grandmother had left $14,200 over the years. By the time I was locked out, there was $2,403 left. And even that had a note beside it in my father's handwriting. "Hold for truck deductible if Eli cooperates." If I cooperates. Not if he. If I. I stared at that line until my hands shook. That was the day something clean snapped inside me. Not my love for them. That had been fraying for years. My availability. That disappeared. Getting thrown out is one kind of pain. Finding out they'd been building the exit ramp with your own money is another. But the part they really miscalculated was what happens to a quiet kid after you remove his last reason to stay small. I didn't become impressive overnight. That part of these stories always gets lied about. I didn't leave the lawn and step into some triumphant montage with dramatic music and instant promotions. I slept in places that smelled like bleach and fryer oil. I rotated between the diner's back office couch, Mark's basement, and a converted porch behind an auto shop where the space heater clicked all night like teeth. But I had two things I'd never had at home. I had no one to appease, and I had proof. During the day, I kept taking shifts at the diner. Nights, I worked with Mr. Valdez, an old locksmith who serviced the strip malls near the interstate. He'd known me since I was 14 because I used to carry his tool bag for $20 and leftover tacos. He didn't ask me for the whole story. He just handed me a ring of blanks and said, "If you're going to survive other people's locks, learn how they work." That line changed my life. Deadbolts, strike plates, rekeys, master systems, panic bars, cabinet cores, then residential smart locks, access panels, small commercial security. I was good at it fast because I noticed patterns, and I didn't panic when something jammed. Turns out the cold kid who kept receipts was built for systems. Within 18 months, I was managing overnight call-outs. Within 3 years, I was installing full access control setups for boutique offices and new build townhomes. Within 5, I had my own company van and a business account with enough steady work to scare me in a good way. And every time I cut a new key, I thought about that one hitting the porch at my feet. Some people get driven by dreams. I got driven by a deadbolt. The funny thing about people who exile you is that they always assume they've exiled you downward. They never imagine you might leave the map they were using. My parents kept tabs without admitting they were keeping tabs. My mother viewed every company post when I launched Hail Access and Entry. Trevor unfollowed me twice, then lurked from a private account with no profile picture. Aunt Denise let slip at Christmas, "Your father says he hopes you're learning the dignity of hard work." That one almost made me choke on my coffee, because I'd been working since 15 while Trevor collected second chances like they were seasonal decorations. I heard things in fragments. Trevor's scholarship disappeared after a bar fight his sophomore year. Then there was a business opportunity with 2 friends and a lifted truck. Then a fitness supplement scheme. Then crypto. Then another investment my father swore was just bridge money until the licensing came through. Every time Trevor failed, my father described it as temporary. Every time I succeeded, he described it as luck. That arrangement lasted exactly as long as his money did. I didn't know how bad it was until 7 years after the lawn. By then, I was 25. I had just closed on a narrow brick duplex on Hawthorne Street with a small detached garage and a first-floor office I was turning into a guest suite. Not fancy, but solid. Restored hardwoods, new windows, good lock lines, a blue front door that made the whole place look steadier than I felt. The down payment came from my business, not magic. 3 years of contracts, 2 years of saying no to stupid spending, 1 very good commercial job with a pediatric clinic chain that paid on time. I remember signing the closing packet at 3:12 p.m. and sitting in my truck afterward, forehead against the steering wheel, not crying exactly, but close enough that it counted. That house was the first place with my name on it. No joint account, no parental leverage, no threat hidden inside generosity. Just mine. 48 hours later, my mother called for the first time in 10 months. That timing told me everything. They always resurfaced when something in my life became undeniable. I let it ring out. Then she texted, "Heard you bought a place. We should talk." Not congratulations, not proud of you. We should talk. I didn't answer. By evening, Aunt Denise had called twice, Trevor once, and my father once from an office line he knew I didn't have saved. When people who spent years making you optional suddenly become urgent, it's never nostalgia. It's need. I found out what they needed 3 days later, and once I knew, the entire tone of their outreach changed from distant authority to sticky, panicked politeness. It was Mark who told me. He came by the duplex with Thai food and a 6-pack and sat cross-legged on my living room floor because I still hadn't bought enough chairs. Halfway through dinner, he said, "You know your parents are losing the house, right?" I actually laughed because it sounded like one of those cousin rumors that mutates every hour. "I'm serious." He pulled up the county auction notice on his phone. There it was. Address, parcel number, sale date in 11 days. My father had taken out a second mortgage 2 years earlier, then a home equity line 18 months after that. Both tied back, one way or another, to Trevor's Wellness Recovery Studio, which was apparently a gym concept with branded shakes, LED lighting, and absolutely no ability to pay rent. When that collapsed, Trevor rolled his credit card debt into my parents' line. When that collapsed, my father missed 3 mortgage payments trying to cover it, while pretending everything was fine. And when people like my father run out of control, they start running out of options very fast. I looked around my half-unpacked duplex and felt this strange stillness move through me. Not joy, not pity, recognition. The same 2 people who threw me out with a wet suitcase were about to need a place to land. They didn't ask right away. First came the softening campaign. My mother sent photos of me at age 6 holding a pumpkin. My father left a voicemail about how time changes perspective. Trevor texted, "We were kids too, man. Family gets ugly sometimes." We. That little word almost impressed me. He had matured just enough to spread his guilt across the room. Then came the practical probes. My mother asked how many bedrooms the duplex had. Trevor asked whether the detached garage had plumbing. My father asked whether I'd structured ownership personally or through the LLC. That one irritated me because it was such a naked little fishing hook. He didn't care about me. He wanted to know how protected the asset was. I stopped ignoring them after that. Not to reconcile, to hear exactly how they were going to dress this up. So when my mother called at 9:07 on a Tuesday night, I answered. She sounded tired, breathy, almost delicate. "Your father and I may need somewhere for a short stretch, just until things stabilize." "How short?" "A few weeks." That meant months. "And Trevor?" A pause. "He's making other arrangements." Which meant no. No, he was not. I could already see the whole setup. My parents in the guest suite, temporarily. Trevor on the couch for a few nights. Then toothbrushes. Then mail. Then old patterns in new walls. I asked the one question that mattered. Why would you think I'd say yes? My mother started crying so fast it sounded rehearsed. Because we're still your parents. There it was, the old invoice, blood as a debt instrument. I let her cry herself out, then said, "You stopped using that title like it meant anything the night you put my suitcase on the lawn." And I hung up. That should have been the end of it. If they had any shame, it would have been. But shame was never the family language. Pressure was. So they went looking for witnesses. The first public move happened in the family group chat. The chat had 43 people in it and had mostly been used for birthday cakes, funeral updates, and blurry holiday photos nobody asked for. My mother dropped into it at 8:16 a.m. on a Thursday with a message so carefully worded I could almost hear my father dictating punctuation. So grateful Eli has welcomed us into his beautiful new home while we sort out a brief housing complication. Family is everything in hard seasons. My phone buzzed 31 times in 4 minutes. Heart emojis, prayer hands, Aunt Denise writing, "See, healing is possible." My Uncle Rob asking whether they needed help moving. One of Trevor's idiot friends actually typing, "Knew you'd come through, bro." I stared at the screen and felt my pulse slow down instead of speed up. Because suddenly, this wasn't about a private ask anymore. They had tried to volunteer my house in public before I had said yes. Same playbook, new address. So I replied in the chat with exactly 2 sentences. To be clear, I have not invited anyone to live in my home. Please don't bring luggage to my property expecting access. Then I attached 1 screenshot. Not the worst one, just the text from my mother the night I was 18. "If you love us, sign it." The chat went dead, not slowed, dead. You could almost hear everyone sit up. My mother called within 20 seconds. I didn't answer. Then my father called. Then Trevor. Then Aunt Denise, which told me the blast radius had reached peak gossip velocity. Most people back off when the lie gets punctured. My parents escalated. Because once they'd promised the family they were moving into my house, they had to either admit they'd lied or force me to make the lie true. They chose force. I was hosting a small housewarming that Saturday. Nothing huge, 10 people. Mark, Mr. Valdez, my business partner Nia, 2 neighbors, my girlfriend Ava, some takeout trays, folding chairs, cheap string lights in the back patio, because I still wasn't fancy enough to hide that I liked string lights. At 4:38 p.m., my doorbell camera buzzed. I checked my phone and felt my jaw lock. My parents were on the porch. 2 hard-shell roller suitcases, 1 garment bag. My mother in a beige cardigan like she was visiting friends. My father in a pressed polo, carrying himself with that same maddening assumption that presence equals permission. Trevor was behind them in a black SUV, engine running. He had not made other arrangements after all. Of course he hadn't. My mother looked directly into the camera and smiled. "Sweetheart, open up. We just need the spare key so we can get settled before dinner." Before dinner. Like the decision had been made. Like all that remained was logistics. I actually stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by people I liked, and felt the old lawn trying to come back through the floorboards. Ava touched my arm. "Do you want me to call someone?" "No," I said, because suddenly I understood exactly why they'd shown up like this. Not desperation. Stagecraft. They wanted witnesses. They wanted me cornered by hospitality and social optics inside my own house. They wanted me to choose between boundaries and looking cruel. They had come to the wrong address for that. I opened the door, but I didn't invite them in. My father's eyes flicked past me into the house, taking inventory. Guests, music, open food containers, warm light, a life in progress. He tried a smile. "There he is." I said nothing. My mother tilted her head toward the suitcases. "Can you grab the spare? Your father's back is acting up." I looked at the bags, then at Trevor, still sitting in the SUV, pretending not to stare, then back at her. "No." Just that. My father dropped the smile immediately. "Eli, don't do this on the porch." Interesting phrase, considering. "I'm not doing anything on the porch," I said. "You are." Aunt Denise's minivan turned the corner right then. I wish I were kidding. Apparently, my parents had invited extra family to help settle in. She parked behind Trevor, hopped out holding a casserole dish, saw the suitcases, saw me blocking the door, and froze in delighted horror. Social witnesses. Exactly what they wanted. Just not in the direction they were about to get. My mother lowered her voice to something pleading and theatrical. "We told everyone this was handled." "I know." "Then don't embarrass us." That sentence unlocked something clean in me. Not rage, precision. I stepped back once, reached to the narrow entry table, picked up a small white envelope I had put there an hour earlier because some part of me must have known they'd try something like this, and handed it to my father. He frowned and opened it. Inside was a copy of the still frame from Mrs. Kim's porch camera, date and time stamped in the corner, my father on the threshold, my suitcase on the lawn, my mother inside the screen door, me standing in the rain, and at the bottom, in black marker, one sentence. "This is the last time you used a porch to decide whether I belonged." Aunt Denise stopped walking. My mother actually swayed. My father looked up at me and said the stupidest thing available. "You kept this?" "Yes." Then I looked past them at Trevor in the SUV. "And if you want, I can bring out the voicemail, too." He didn't get out of the car. That could have been enough. It should have been enough. But my father still believed tone could overpower evidence, and that mistake is what made the rest of it satisfying. He squared his shoulders and tried to take control of the scene. This is not the time to reopen ancient family conflict over a misunderstanding. From behind me, Mr. Valdez said, very calmly, "A misunderstanding usually doesn't come with luggage." My business partner Nia snorted. Ava folded her arms. Even Aunt Denise, casserole halfway to her chest, had the decency to look embarrassed. My father pushed on. "We made mistakes. We were under pressure, but we are not going to be denied basic decency by our own son." That was when my mother made the tactical error that killed the performance. She reached for my forearm. Not hard, just entitled, like my body was still available for emotional leverage. I stepped back. Don't touch me. The whole porch changed. Small sentence, huge shift. Because now, even the people still trying to give them grace had to face what was physically happening. Two parents who had lied publicly arrived uninvited with bags and were trying to force access to a son's home after years of estrangement. Aunt Denise set the casserole down on Trevor's hood and said, "Linda, did he actually invite you?" My mother started crying on command, but the timing was off now. Too quick, too polished. "We thought—" "No," I said. "You told people. That's different." Then I pulled out my phone, opened the family group chat, and read my mother's message out loud. "So grateful Eli has welcomed us into his beautiful new home." I held the screen where everyone could see the timestamp. Then I read my reply. "I have not invited anyone to live in my home." Not opinion, sequence, proof. Nia murmured, "Jesus." My father's face tightened because he could feel the momentum leaving him. So he tried the last refuge of people like him, history laundering. "We gave you 18 years under our roof." It came out sharp, confident, accusing. I nodded. "And on the last night of those 18 years, you threw me off the property because I wouldn't take Trevor's DUI story for him." Silence. Trevor slammed his SUV door open so hard the whole vehicle rocked. It wasn't a DUI. That one line gave away more than anything I could have said. Nobody had used that word on the porch but me. Aunt Denise turned slowly toward him. Trevor realized it half a second too late. When liars panic, they start correcting details no honest person asked about. And the second Trevor spoke, the whole family myth cracked in the middle. My father snapped, "Get back in the car." Trevor actually hesitated. I had never seen that before. Not because he respected me, because for the first time in his life, he could feel the room not automatically tilting his way. I looked at him. "You want me to play the voicemail?" His face changed. That scared him more than the video. Because unlike a blurry old clip, audio feels intimate. It makes people hear themselves as other people hear them. My mother whispered, "Eli, please." There it was again. That word she had not used the night I begged for 5 minutes to call Mark before she locked the door. Please, now, because now there was an audience. I opened the file anyway. Not all of it, just enough. My father's voice came through the phone speaker, ugly and clear in the late-night background hiss. "If you make us choose tonight, don't expect to like the answer." I stopped it there. Didn't need the rest. You could feel the porch absorbing it. Aunt Denise closed her eyes. Mr. Valdez looked at the brick like he was counting to stay polite. Ava stepped closer to me until our shoulders touched. My father went pale in a way I had never seen. He wasn't ashamed. He was cornered. And cornered men like him always reach for anger when authority fails. He took one step toward the threshold. You want to humiliate your own parents in front of strangers? I didn't move. You humiliated yourselves when you packed luggage for a house that isn't yours. He stared at me, then at the blue door, then at the guests inside my home who were no longer pretending not to listen. And I watched him finally understand the part that had been killing him since he first heard I bought this place. It wasn't that I had a house. It was that he couldn't define my place in it. He still wasn't done. Men like him never are. He had one last card left, and it was the oldest one in the deck. He tried to make me feel guilty for surviving them. My mother sat down on one of the suitcases right there on the porch and cried into both hands. Not delicate this time. Messy, loud, real enough to unsettle me. Where are we supposed to go? That question hit harder than the rest, because unlike their performance, it had a true center. They really were losing the house. They really did need somewhere. For one dangerous second, I saw the version of myself they had always exploited, the one that rushed toward distress, even when the distress was caused by the person grabbing him. Then Trevor ruined it. He leaned against the SUV and muttered, "Can we just get this over with?" No apology, no responsibility, just inconvenience. And suddenly the whole thing snapped back into focus. They were not here because they had changed. They were here because their backup plan had a blue front door and a guest suite. I looked at my mother and answered honestly, "I don't know where you're supposed to go." That hurt her. I let it. Ask one of the relatives you told I invited you. Ask the son you spent 7 years funding while you called me selfish. Ask the father who said I didn't live there if I wouldn't lie for him. My father's mouth went thin. "You are enjoying this." "No," I said. "I just stopped volunteering to be the soft place where you land." That line landed on the porch and stayed there. Aunt Denise picked up her casserole and took 2 steps back. Not toward me, away from them, which in my family counted as a public declaration. I bent down, lifted one of their suitcases by the handle, rolled it back across the porch boards, and set it beside the steps. Not cruelly, precisely. Then I looked at my father and said, "You asked for my spare key." He said nothing. I reached into my pocket. For 1 second, his eyes changed. Hope, reflexive and stupid. I pulled out a single brass key on a faded red keychain, their old house key, the one he had thrown at my feet 7 years earlier. I had found it in the grass the morning after the lockout and kept it ever since, rain-stained, slightly tarnished, worthless to their current locks, if those locks even still existed. But I had kept it because some objects stop being tools and become evidence. I held it up between us. "This," I said, "is the only key I ever got from you." Then I placed it on top of the suitcase. My mother made a small, broken sound in her throat. My father didn't touch it. He just looked at me with naked hatred and something worse under it. recognition. Because at last the balance was visible even to him. He had once decided whether I slept inside. Now I was deciding it for him. I stepped back into my doorway. "No one is moving into this house," I said. "Not tonight, not temporarily, not after 1 week, not under pressure, not through guilt, and not because you lied in public and thought I'd clean it up for you." Then I closed the door. Not a slam, just a firm, even shut. The same sound a deadbolt makes when it belongs to the person using it. From the front window, I watched the rest. Aunt Denise left first. Then Trevor, furious, peeled out so hard backing up that he clipped the curb. My parents stayed on the porch for another 4 minutes and 21 seconds. I know because the camera timestamp burned into my mind. My mother crying, my father standing still, the suitcase with the old key on top between them like a verdict. Finally, he picked it up. Not the suitcase, the key. He turned it over once in his hand, as if trying to remember the exact weight of the night he'd thrown it away. Then he set it back down. They left both suitcases in the driveway for a full minute before coming back for them. I won't lie to you. That minute fed something in me. Not because I wanted them homeless, because I wanted them to feel the shape of a threshold they no longer controlled. You could end the story there, and it would already be better than what they deserved. But the cleanest part came 9 days later, at 8:06 in the morning, when my office line rang with a contract I almost thought was a joke. The bank handling my parents' foreclosure had a rush resecure order. Vacancy confirmation pending. Change all exterior locks. Install temporary lockbox. Document entry points. Standard job. The property address was my parents' house. I stared at the order on my screen so long, Nia came in and said, "You okay?" I turned the monitor toward her. She read the address, then looked at me carefully. "You don't have to take it." I knew that. I also knew something else. For 7 years, I had never once chased revenge in the stupid, loud way people imagine. I never tried to ruin their jobs, never trashed them online, never sent the whole extended family a midnight dossier. I just built distance, built a business, built doors they couldn't force. But this wasn't revenge. This was work arriving with exquisite timing. "I'm taking it," I said. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe all childhood homes do once the fear evaporates. Same patchy lawn, same bad drainage near the mailbox, same porch light with bugs trapped in the yellow cover. But the place felt hollow now, like the authority had leaked out through the mortgage papers. A county notice was taped inside the front window. My van was at the curb by 9:14. Nia came with me, because she insisted and because she knew I shouldn't do it alone. We worked in polos with the company logo on the chest. Clipboards, tool cases, clean process, no drama. My parents' car was gone. Trevor's too. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd do the whole job without seeing any of them. Then my father's sedan came around the corner. Of course it did. He parked across the street and got out so hard the door bounced. My mother was in the passenger seat. Neither of them crossed immediately. They just stood there on the sidewalk, looking at me on the porch of the house they had used like a weapon for years. Then my father walked over. He took in the van, the logo, the tools, me at the lock. I will never forget his face, not because it was dramatic, because it was stripped. All the old performance was gone, all the fatherly authority, all the sarcasm, all the business owner certainty. What was left looked smaller, meaner, and finally, unmistakably dependent on reality. "You're doing this yourself?" "Yes." He looked past me toward the door. "You don't have to." There's a sentence I waited years to hear in some form. Not about the job, about anything. You don't have to. No pressure, no command, no family script wrapped around my throat. Just the first honest acknowledgement that I had a choice. And because I had a choice, my answer meant something. "I know," I said. Then I removed the old cylinder. He watched the whole thing, the screws backing out, the hardware loosening, the deadbolt sliding free. The same kind of lock that had shut me out at 18, coming apart in my hands with no ceremony at all. It took me less than 3 minutes. That's another thing people don't tell you. Some of the doors that define your life come down with 8 turns of a screwdriver. My mother came up beside him while I keyed the new set. She looked older than she had on my porch, smaller. Not because of punishment, because panic ages people faster than time. "Can we at least get a copy?" she asked quietly. There it was, the spare key. Not to my duplex this time, to the life they were losing. I held the fresh keys in my palm, bright and sharp, and looked at both of them. 7 years earlier, they had stood in a doorway and decided whether I deserved shelter. Now they were standing on a public sidewalk, asking me for access. Nia was behind me with the paperwork. The county notice fluttered in the window. A neighbor down the block was absolutely pretending not to stare. Social witnesses again. Perfect. I closed my fist around the keys. "No," I said. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Maybe because he couldn't. Maybe because, for once, he understood exactly what had made this moment possible. And it wasn't spite. It was memory. It was documentation. It was the accumulated cost of every time they bet I would break before I built. I finished the rekey, installed the lockbox, logged the serial numbers, and stepped off the porch. As I passed him, my father said my name one last time. Not sharply, just once. "Eli." I turned. He looked at the blue contractor clipboard in my hand, then at the front door, then back at me. And for 1 second I thought maybe, finally, after all this, he was going to say the word that should have been said 7 years earlier. Sorry. He didn't. He said, "You always did know how to shut people out." That was the best he had. That was the whole man right there. I smiled for the first time all morning. "No," I said. "I just learned from you." Then I got in my van and drove away. A week later, Aunt Denise sent a message that actually started with, "I owe you an apology." Trevor disappeared to Arizona with a woman selling performance coaching on social media. My mother left 2 voicemails I never returned. In one of them, she cried. In the other, she sounded almost calm and asked if I still had my winter coat from senior year because there might have been cash in the pocket. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. I never heard from my father again, not directly. But once, about 6 months later, a commercial client mentioned he had met an older guy named Harris, who said his son ran one of the best access companies in the county. No warmth in the story, no repair, just reluctant fact. Honestly, that fit. Some people never apologize. They just slowly run out of ways to deny what you became without them. As for the duplex, I finished the guest suite exactly the way I wanted. Light gray walls, built-in shelves, quiet locks. Ava moved in the following spring. Not because she needed rescue, because she chose the place, and so did I. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that lawn, about how cold the rain was, how heavy the suitcase felt, how impossible it seemed that a life could start in a moment that humiliating. But that's the thing about thresholds. The people standing inside always think they're the only ones with power. They forget the person outside can leave. And once they do, the whole architecture changes. The last key my father ever threw at me opened nothing, because by the time he needed one back, I had already built doors that no longer recognized him.